What's up everyone? In this video we're going to be talking about how to put together the seesaw ball clock, or I don't know, I'm going to come up with something better for that. But get all the parts printed out. If you don't have them, they're available for purchase on engineeasy.com. You're going to need some other parts for this build, including a bunch of M3 screws. There's an entire bill of materials included in the download package and on my website. You're going to need some bearings as well. These are 3mm ID bearings with a 10mm outer diameter and a 4mm thickness. This is not necessary, but I recommend it. A powered screwdriver. This one is the one that I love to use. It has a clutch. I've also put a link for that as well. And then of course you're going to need a bunch of steel marbles. Most of the parts print without supports, but there are a few of them that do need supports. I've organized everything in the download package, so you'll know exactly which ones need support. Alright, let's start by pressing bearings into the parts. So anything with this 10mm hole that looks like it would fit a bearing perfectly, press a bearing into that. Sometimes the bearings are a little bit hard to get in. You could use a hammer, the back of a screwdriver, a vise, pliers, anything that will get the parts, anything that will get the bearings in. Here I'm hammering the bearings in on this steel plate, which is a super useful thing to have. On these parts, it's kind of hard to get the bearings in. I used the back of a screwdriver to try to push it in. It didn't even go all the way in, but as long as the screw can go in there and is pretty straight, you're good to go. Next up, we're going to throw this back support onto the back of the post. You use 8mm screws to hold this thing in place. And you'll see right here, this is where the electric screwdriver comes in super clutch. Unless you want a wrist workout, this is going to become very tricky. You could use a drill as well. I would just make sure that you're not using the drill on a high torque setting, because you could strip these holes pretty easily. Now grab some 25mm screws. Throw 2 washers onto the end of the screw. And we're going to start with this top seesaw. That's the one with the 9 on the front. So get the hole lined up. And on every screw on this build, you're going to want to try to get the screw to go in as straight as possible. So you can either squeeze it or push it down against the table. But this, I'm trying to make sure that the screw is going in super straight. And give it a couple twists and wiggles to make sure it's good. I didn't screw it all the way in because these screws do generate quite a bit of heat when you're screwing them. So I decided to just screw it in a little bit of the way, and I'll get back to it. I break this rule from time to time in this build. Honestly, it probably doesn't matter, but we like to feel like we have control over these things. So there, I screw all the way in, broke my rule already, and then I went back and fixed that one. And everything looks pretty straight. Everything's moving. If it's a little too tight, you can back off the screw a little bit and it should be loose. None of this is really precision engineering. You know, it's all 3D printed parts, so if there's a little bit of wiggle, it's probably going to be okay. So we continue the process with the lower seesaw. And now we got all 3 seesaws in. Now we're going to screw the post to the base, and it's kind of the same thing, just make sure it's as flat as you possibly can get it. This one's actually pretty important, but it's also easy to squeeze nice and flat. So once you got it flat, grab your electric screwdriver or drill, or if you're doing it manually, get those screws in there. For this one, I'm using the 20mm screws. You can probably get away with 12mm screws on this. Depends on what you got. But if you're following the BOM, you should have enough if you got this little kit of screws, which is probably your best way to go. It's like $12 Canadian, so it's probably even cheaper if you're living in the States. And on this one, I'm very wholeheartedly living up to my rule of going one screw at a time, bit by bit, so I'm not overheating the plastic. But again, if you don't do that, it's probably fine. Next, grab this circle piece, a long screw, 20 mil, 25 mil, and just screw the piece into this is like the side post. And if you get it lined up, it should just lock right into place just like that. And then you can screw the side post into the base, and same thing, just try to hold it as flat as possible. Hold it tight to the base as you're getting the first screw in. And yeah, again, I guess I'm going with the half screw rule here. Now, if you're sitting here wondering why I have my name written on my electric screwdriver, it is because I have a Phantom that comes into my shop sometimes, and that Phantom has the same screwdriver as me, and sometimes steals my screwdriver. And if it looks like the screwdriver is screw driving backwards, that's just a frame rate thing. These aren't reverse screws, they're regular. Righty-tighty. That is interesting though. Wow, really living up to my rule on this one, making sure nothing's overheating, nothing's stripping the plastic. All right, looking good. So grab this piece right here and make sure that the holes or the half holes are oriented backwards. And I've actually adjusted this piece, this accumulator piece a little bit, but everything goes together the same way. So if it looks different, don't worry, I've just made it better. And you're going to use 8mm screws and screw this into the bottom. Screw this in through the bottom. And then you can grab this small initial track piece, and that will screw into this side. And I'm using a 12mm screw here. Looking pretty good. Now we're going to go with the middle-sized lower track piece. And you'll know it's right if it's stacking right over top of the first one, just like that. And you can get another 12mm screw into the bottom of that. And then of course the last one, and look at that perfect 3 stack. That's how you know everything's looking right. Another 12mm screw, and it should be secured. So this goes into the top of the base just like this. The pieces wrap around the side post, and then with a long 20mm screw, if it doesn't fit, then it's probably 25. I think it's 20 though. You can screw that into the side post, and then you can grab some screws and screw them into the bottom. This could be 12mm, 16mm. It's builder's choice. Then we're going to chuck a screw into this hole right here as well. And then another one in the lower hole, and this one's kind of tricky to get in. That is my bad. A little bit of a design flaw, but it works. And so I decided to keep it. And then finally, the screw that goes into this piece right here will secure that accumulator down. Next, grab this track piece, and that will go right here. And this is where you flip it over, and then you can throw some screws in through those side holes. And it's important that you use 8mm screws on these because you don't want them popping out through the other side. This is probably the only place on this entire build where you have to use 8mm screws. Pretty much everything else is kind of fair game. And here, I don't know what came over me. I decided to go for the manual screw. Look at me working those forearms. Guess I still got it, even after all this time using that electric screwdriver. Now you have this track piece that will go right in here, and it should line up with the hole on the first track piece you just put in. You can squeeze them together just like this. And then grab 2 longer screws. You're going to need probably the 25s. They go into these holes. Yeah, 25s. Boom. And then you can screw those into place. It's crazy. It looks like I'm screwing everything in backwards, but I swear I'm not. These are all normal, standard threaded M3 screws. And then you get one more screw into this back hole here. I think I used the 12mm screw, but you could probably get away with an 8 on this one. And look at that great camera work. But I got it in. We're going to finish this off with another screw into the side post, and that should hold that track perfectly into place. Beautiful. Now this is a fun one. You just got to wrap this track piece around. See me messing around with it, but once it gets into the right place, it will sit perfectly in that top panel, and that peg will pop into the circle piece. And then you can throw a screw into the side post, and into this part of the side post, and into this part of the side post. And then get those all down into place. This time I'm saying completely to hell with the whole one screw a bit at a time, and I'm just going for a full send. Now this piece goes into this section right here. And I actually took it off, threw a screw into the back of it. Thought this would help me. And that screws into, well, it will screw into that hole, I swear. Okay, there it is. Screws into that hole right there on that track piece. And then again, don't forget this is 8mm screws. You have to be very specific about these because they will bust through the other side of the track, but 8mm screws won't bust through the other side of the track. 12 will. All right, finally for the track pieces, grab this little segment. A couple screws go in here. That's 1. That's 2. And then one more design. Oh, wait. For some reason, I didn't screw it in all the way. And then one more design flaw screw. Make sure it's long enough that it fits. Yeah, that's the one. And I'm actually just like pushing it through the track here, but it's fine. It's 3D printed parts. Everything's going to be okay. And that's it for the track pieces. Look at that. This is probably the best part of the whole build. Pop. Grab a 20mm screw. You could probably get away with a 16 on this one if you don't feel like screwing it all the way in. Both are secure enough. Then you're going to throw 2 washers onto the end of that screw. It looks like I only did 1, but 2 is probably better. And then screw that into the end of the accumulator track piece. Now this step is not mandatory, but it's fun, so you might as well do it. Beautiful, satisfying. Grab a screw. Let's go with the 12mm on this one. Throw it through the top hole in the rack. Add 2 washers to that. And then you can screw that into either side of the connecting link. They're both the same. So pick one. Just make sure that you screw it in as straight as possible. So you can see here I'm pushing it against the table and piece that a little bit, but it actually turns out you don't need that piece because I ended up including it in the base. So if you're wondering why I have it and you don't, it's because I've improved this design. Now grab your 22 sprocket and some pliers, and you're gonna have to pry the top piece off of the top of that. It's actually like not that hard, even though I made it look way harder than it is. And then that's gonna press into the top of the crank. And you need a hammer or whatever you have that can hammer that thing into place. You want it to be tight. Make sure it's all the way down, and then you can grab a screw and 2 washers. And you may notice here that I have a band-aid on. It is unrelated to the build of this project, so do not stress about the danger. This is a pretty safe activity. And push it down, make sure you're screwing in as straight as possible. And boom. And this is kind of satisfying, but look at the clearance. Boom. You know what they say, clearance is clearance. So the rack will slide into the slot in the base. Just like that. Just like that. And then this will line up with the holes on the back of that stand. You can throw these brackets on top. This is kind of a tricky thing to get these screws in, but I have faith in you. And here you could use 12 mil, 8 mil, either or. Screw on both sides. It's a bit of a tricky step. I apologize for this one, but if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? Get the other bracket in. Some screws. And another screw, and don't worry, we're getting pretty close to being done here. So I didn't show the step of putting the motor onto this bracket, but you basically just screw the top 2 holes into this bracket, and then that will slide into the sprocket part. You can grab a couple screws, and those go into the holes in the bottom, and that will hold the bracket into place. I believe I'm using M16 screws here. I think you can go with the 12s as well. They're both pretty tight. They're both enough threads to hold everything tightly. And then you need to tighten the set screws on the sprocket as hard as you can into the motor. This is a very important step because if that slips, the clock just stops working. And there's a hole in the bottom of the base. If you have a set screw that's facing down, you could also just move the shaft. Next, grab your sprocket and arm. Next, grab the gear and the arm. And with the little spot on the gear, and with the little cutout, and with the little marker on the gear facing down, throw 2 screws into there and screw it into place. You can use the M12s here. You can use M3x12 here. Probably get away with the 16s, depends on what you bought, but you should have enough of these screws. You should have some screws left over if you're using the kit. Now the sprocket's going to slide down into the base area like this, and you're going to match up the 2 cutouts. Then use that to slide the rack. Then use that to slide the rack back into place, and then you can get a screw into the front there. You don't have to screw it very tight because this one's double mounted. Because this one's double supported, so you got to get a screw into the back as well. And boom, that's the build. So once you got everything assembled, you're gonna have to figure out how to drive it. And honestly, I would do a really bad job of trying to create a tutorial on how to drive stepper motors. And there's already this really great tutorial on YouTube that describes the entire process. So I've linked that below. Check it out. It'll give you everything that you need. Have fun with it. And I'll see you in the next project.